Roses are red. Violets are blue. Grass is green. The sky on a clear day is a gorgeous shade of blue. Every child knows this. You point at an apple and say, "What color is that?" And the kid says, "Red." No hesitation. It's red. It's obviously red. The redness is right there sitting on the surface of the apple, plain as day. You can see it. You can practically reach out and touch the redness. And I want you to hold on to that feeling for a moment, that absolute certainty, that sense that the world is colored, that color is real, that it is out there, painted on the surfaces of everything, just waiting for you to open your eyes and look. Because I am about to take it away from you. That apple is not red. The sky is not blue. Grass is not green. Nothing you have ever looked at in your entire life has had any color whatsoever. Not one thing. Not ever. Color does not exist out there in the world. It never has. And by the time we are finished here today, you will understand exactly why. But first, let us give the other side its day in court, because the idea that objects have color is not stupid. It is one of the most reasonable, common-sense ideas a human being ever came up with, and the evidence for it seems overwhelming. Let me lay it out. That you walk outside, you see a fire truck. It is red. You walk halfway around the block. Still red. You look at it in the morning. Red. You look at it in the afternoon. Still red. You come back the next day. Red. You take a photograph of it. Red. You show the photograph to a friend in another city. They say red. The redness appears to be a stable, persistent, perfectly reliable property of the truck. It does not depend on where you are standing. It does not depend on what time of day it is. It does not depend on who is doing the looking. It seems as fixed and objective as the truck's weight or the number of wheels it has. And look around you. The world is absolutely drenched in color. Bananas are yellow. Oceans are blue. Trees are green. Sunsets are orange and red and pink. Every single surface you look at seems to come with a color attached, like a label, like a permanent feature. And these labels are shared. If I hold up an orange and ask 50 people what color it is, they will all say the same thing. If color were an illusion, some kind of trick, would it not be chaos? Everybody seeing different things. Instead, we have consistency, agreement, stability. So the obvious conclusion, the one that every civilization in human history has arrived at, is dead simple. Color is a property of objects. It belongs to the thing you are looking at. The apple possesses redness the same way it possesses mass and shape. The sky possesses blueness. The grass possesses greenness. These are facts about the world, and that is completely wrong. All of it, every word. Let me start pulling the threads. The first thing we need to do is ask a very basic question. What is light? Not what does it look like, not what do we use it for. What is it physically? Isaac Newton was the first person to really crack this open in a serious way. Back in 1666, he took a glass prism and let a beam of sunlight pass through it. What came out the other side was a rainbow, a spread of colors from red on one end to violet on the other, fanned out across the wall of his room. Now, people had seen rainbows before. People had seen prisms make pretty colors before. But Newton did something nobody else had done. He took that spread-out rainbow and passed it through a second prism, and the colors recombined back into white light. What did that prove? It proved that white light is not simple. It is a mixture. It contains all the colors of the rainbow, all blended together. The prism does not create color. It reveals what was hidden inside. That was a revolution. Before Newton, people thought white light was pure, and colors were corruptions. Newton showed it was the other way around. The colors were the components, and white was the mixture. And Newton noticed something else, something subtle and brilliant. He took that rainbow spectrum and bent it into a circle, a color wheel, to show how the colors related to each other. And in doing so, he connected the red end to the violet end. He closed the loop. But in nature, in the actual spectrum, there is no loop. Red and violet are at opposite ends of a line. Newton's color wheel was the first hint that the way we organize color has more to do with our perception than with the physics. The spectrum is a line. The color wheel is a human invention. We will come back to that. Newton also discovered something troubling about orange. He could create the experience of orange in two ways. He could isolate the orange portion of the spectrum, a single band of wavelengths between red and yellow, pure spectral orange. Or he could mix red light and yellow light together, and the result looked orange too. Same experience, different physics. Newton had stumbled, without fully realizing it, onto the fact that the eye could be fooled, that the language of color was not the same as the language of wavelengths. It would take centuries for that distinction to be fully understood. But what are these components, physically? It took another 200 years to answer that. James Clerk Maxwell, in the 1860s, showed that light is an electromagnetic wave, a ripple in the electromagnetic field, the same kind of field that makes magnets work, the same kind of field that makes your hair stand up from a rubber balloon. Light is just a traveling disturbance in that field, moving at roughly 186,000 miles per second. And like any wave, it has a wavelength, it has a frequency. A short wavelength means a high frequency. A long wavelength means a low frequency. That is all there is to it. Now here's what I need you to understand. The electromagnetic spectrum is vast. It stretches from radio waves, which can have wavelengths of hundreds of meters, longer than a football field, all the way down to gamma rays, which have wavelengths smaller than the nucleus of an atom. In between you have microwaves, infrared radiation, ultraviolet, X-rays, all the same kind of wave, the same physics governs all of them. The only difference between a radio wave and a gamma ray is the wavelength. That is it. And out of that enormous spectrum, that vast continuum of possible wavelengths, your eyes can detect a pathetically thin sliver, from roughly 380 nanometers at the violet end to roughly 700 nanometers at the red end. That is your window. That is everything you have ever seen. Every sunset, every rainbow, every painting, every face. All of it comes through that one tiny crack in the electromagnetic wall. Everything else is invisible to you. Not dark, not hidden behind something. Invisible. You have no sensory access to it whatsoever. Radio waves are passing through your body right now, thousands of them, carrying music and voices and television signals, and you feel nothing. Infrared radiation is pouring off every warm object in the room, and you cannot see it. Ultraviolet light from the sun is bouncing off surfaces all around you, and it might as well not exist. You are sitting in the middle of a vast electromagnetic ocean, and you can see the tiniest puddle. A rattlesnake, by contrast, has infrared detectors and pit organs on the sides of its head. It can see the body heat of a mouse in total darkness. It cannot guess where the mouse is. See it as clearly as you see a lamp. That mouse is glowing in the infrared, radiating wavelengths around 10,000 nanometers, and the snake detects those wavelengths with specialized pit organs that produce a kind of thermal image. The snake navigates a visual world that overlaps with yours barely at all. And remember, the physics governing infrared light is the same physics governing the light you see. Same equations, same wave behavior, same electromagnetic field. The snake is not perceiving a different universe, it is perceiving a different slice of the same universe. Your slice and the snake's slice barely touch. So already we have a problem. Because if color were really a property of the world, you would expect the world to have color at every wavelength. But it does not. Radio waves do not have a color. X-rays do not have a color. Only this absurdly narrow band seems colored. Does that not strike you as suspicious? Is the universe only colored in one little strip and gray everywhere else? Or is it more likely that the coloring is something you are adding? But fine, let us keep going. Let us look more carefully at what happens when light bounces off an object and enters your eye. Because this is where the story really falls apart. An apple sits on a table. Sunlight falls on it. What happens? The atoms in the apple's skin absorb certain wavelengths of light and reflect others. In the case of a red apple, the surface absorbs most of the shorter wavelengths, the blues and greens, and reflects back the longer wavelengths, the reds and oranges. That reflected light travels through the air, enters your eye, passes through the cornea and the lens, and hits the retina at the back of your eyeball. So far, no color. Wavelengths bounced off a surface and hit a detector. There is no redness anywhere in this process. The wavelengths have frequencies and amplitudes. They do not have redness. Redness is not a physical quantity. You will not find it in any equation. You will not find it in Maxwell's equations. You will not find it in quantum electrodynamics. It is not there. But something has to turn those wavelengths into an experience, and that something is your retina. In the back of your eye, on the retina, there are about 6 million tiny cells called cones. These are your color senses, and there are exactly 3 types. One type, the L cones, responds most strongly to longer wavelengths peaking around 560 nanometers. Another type, the M cones, responds most strongly to medium wavelengths, peaking around 530 nanometers. And the third type, the S cones, responds most strongly to shorter wavelengths, peaking around 420 nanometers. Now I need you to notice something important. These are not precision instruments. Each cone type does not detect one specific wavelength like a radio tuned to one station. Each cone responds to a broad overlapping range of wavelengths. The L cones respond somewhat to green light. The M cones respond somewhat to red light. They are mushy, imprecise, overlapping bell curves of sensitivity. And you know what else? The L cone peaks at 560 nanometers. That is not red, that is yellowish green. The L cone peaks at 530 nanometers. Also green, so your so-called red and green detectors both peak in the green part of the spectrum. If you told an engineer you wanted to build a color detection system and this is the design they came up with, you would fire that engineer. It is a terrible design. But it works because the brain is very clever about what it does with the signals. When light hits your retina, each of the three cone types generates a signal proportional to how strongly it was stimulated. And that is all the information your brain receives. Three numbers: the L signal, the M signal, and the S signal. Three numbers out of the infinite complexity of the electromagnetic spectrum. Let me say that again, because it matters. The light coming into your eye might have any spectral composition whatsoever. It might be a single pure wavelength. It might be a mix of 50 different wavelengths in different proportions. It could be anything. The spectrum of incoming light is an infinitely complex function with information at every single wavelength. And your eye reduces all of that to three numbers. Three numbers, that is the entire input to your color vision system. Everything else, the millions of colors you think you see, the subtle gradations, the shades and tints and hues, all of it is reconstructed by your brain from those three impoverished numbers. This has a devastating consequence, and it is the one thing above all else that proves color is not a property of the world. Imagine I show you a light that has a single pure wavelength of 570 nanometers. Monochromatic yellow light. It stimulates your L cones quite a lot, your M cones quite a lot, and your S cones very little. Your brain receives those three numbers, does its computation, and presents you with the experience of yellow. Now imagine a completely different light. This one is not monochromatic at all. It is a mixture of two wavelengths, roughly 700 nanometers, which is red, and roughly 530 nanometers, which is green. Those two wavelengths, arriving simultaneously, stimulate your L cones quite a lot, your M cones quite a lot, and your SIR cones very little. Same three numbers, completely different physical light. And you see yellow, the exact same yellow, indistinguishable. You cannot tell the difference. No amount of squinting, no amount of concentration, no amount of practice will help to your visual system. These are identical, but they are not identical. Not even close. A spectrometer, a simple physical instrument, can tell them apart immediately. One is monochromatic, the other is a mixture. They have completely different spectral compositions. The physical reality is different, but your experience is the same. This phenomenon has a name: Metamerism. And it is not a footnote. It is not a quirk. It is the foundation of every color screen you have ever looked at. That television in your living room, the one you watch movies on, it has tiny light-emitting elements in three colors. Red, green, and blue. That is all. Three wavelengths. And by mixing those three in different proportions, it can make you see what looks like every color in the visible spectrum. You look at the screen and see a lemon. Yellow. But there is no yellow light coming from that screen. Not a single photon of 570 nanometer light. There is only a careful mixture of red and green calibrated to produce the same three numbers in your cones that real yellow light would produce. Your television is a metamerism machine. It is an elaborate device for lying to your eyes in a precise and consistent way. And it works flawlessly because your eyes are lying right back. They were never detecting wavelengths. They were never reading out the spectral truth. They were always and only providing three numbers. I want you to sit with this for a moment. If two physically different lights produce the same experience, then the experience is not telling you about the light. The experience is telling you about your nervous system's response to the light. Color is not a detection. It is a construction. Think about what that means for every argument you have ever had about color. That shirt is teal. No, it is turquoise. You think you are arguing about the shirt. You are not. You are arguing about what is happening inside two different skulls that receive slightly different three-number summaries of the same electromagnetic and some setting electromagnetic and some setting as summaries of the same. What's backed is different interpretations. The shirt is just sitting there reflecting a complex spectrum of wavelengths, minding its own business, possessing no color opinion of its own. Or think about this. The same object can change color for the same person depending on what it sits next to. Put an orange on a blue tablecloth and it looks more vivid, more intensely orange than it does on a neutral gray surface. The wavelengths reflecting off the orange have not changed. The electromagnetic situation is identical. But your brain is running a contrast computation, comparing the orange to its surroundings and boosting the perceived saturation. The color you see is not just about the object, it is about the entire visual scene. But it gets worse. Oh, it gets so much worse. Take a white sheet of paper. Hold it outside in bright sunlight. It looks white. Now bring it inside your kitchen under the fluorescent lights. Still white. Now take it into a room lit only by candlelight. That warm, orange, flickering candlelight. And the paper still looks white. Do you appreciate how strange that is? Sunlight is a broad spectrum light, roughly even across the visible range. Fluorescent light is spiky and irregular, with sharp peaks at certain wavelengths and deep valleys at others. Candlelight is overwhelmingly weighted toward the red end of the spectrum. The actual light reflecting off that paper into your eye is dramatically different in all three situations. The three numbers from your cones are completely different. Completely. And yet you see white. Every time. Your brain is not showing you what is actually arriving at your retina. It is interpreting the scene. It is looking at the overall illumination, making an estimate of what the light source probably looks like, subtracting that out, and presenting you with what it calculates the true surface color probably is. This process is called color constancy, and it is one of the most sophisticated computations your nervous system performs, and you are never ever aware of it happening. What is really going on here? This brain of yours is a liar. Not a careless liar, a masterful, strategic, highly competent liar. It lies to you in exactly the way that is useful, because what you need to know as an organism trying to survive is not what wavelengths happen to be bouncing around the room. What you need to know is that piece of fruit ripe? Is that animal dangerous? Is that person's face flushed? You need to identify objects and surfaces, regardless of the lighting. So your brain removes the lighting from the equation and shows you a corrected, adjusted, stabilized image. Very useful, but not true. Not in any simple sense of the word. And now let me show you something that makes this even more unsettling. Magenta. You know the color. Vivid. Bright, reddish purple. You see it on flowers, on fabric, on paint chips at the hardware store. A perfectly ordinary color. Go find it on the electromagnetic spectrum. I will wait. You will not find it. Magenta does not correspond to any single wavelength of light. It is not between red and blue on the spectrum. There is no between red and blue on the spectrum. The spectrum is a line. Red is at one end around 700 nanometers. Violet is at the other end, around 380 nanometers. The spectrum does not wrap around. There is no loop. There is no bridge from red to violet. But your brain needs to categorize every combination of cone signals, and some combinations do not correspond to any single wavelength. When you stimulate the L cone strongly and the S cone strongly with very little M cone activity, there is no single wavelength that does that. A single wavelength, whatever it is, always stimulates the M cones somewhat if it stimulates the L cones. The physics does not allow for the particular pattern of three numbers that a red plus blue mix produces. So your brain invents a color. It fills in the gap with a purely neurological fabrication. Magenta is a hallucination. A gorgeous, vivid, perfectly consistent hallucination that every human brain generates the same way. And you see it all the time without ever suspecting it is not out there. If your brain can invent magenta, what else is it inventing? The answer is everything. Every color you see is constructed. Some of them correspond loosely to single wavelengths. Others, like magenta, do not correspond to any wavelength at all. But none of them are readouts of physical reality. All of them are interpretations generated inside your skull based on three numbers. Let me give you one more demonstration. Stare at a bright red square on a white wall for about 30 seconds. Stare hard. Keep your eyes fixed on it. Then look away at a plain white wall. You will see a green square, a vivid green square, floating right there on that white surface. There is no green light coming from that wall. None. The wall is reflecting the same broad spectrum it always reflects. It always reflects, but your L cones are fatigued. They have been working hard for 30 seconds staring at red, so when you look at the white wall, your L cones respond weakly, while your M and S cones respond normally. The balance has shifted, and your brain, reading those three numbers, constructs the experience of green, vivid and unmistakable, conjured from nothing but cone fatigue. There is not a single photon of green light behaving differently. The physics has not changed. Your brain chemistry changed, and so the color changed, because color was never in the photons. Or consider this: I placed two patches of gray paint on a page. Same paint, same pigment, same physical surface, identical wavelengths bouncing off both, but I surround one with a dark border and the other with a light border. And they look different. One looks lighter, the other darker. Same physical stimulus, different experience. Your brain is comparing, adjusting, computing context, and serving you an edited image. This is called simultaneous contrast, and painters have known about it for centuries. A dab of gray paint next to a bright yellow looks slightly purple. Next to a vivid red, it looks slightly green. The gray paint has not changed. The wavelengths have not changed. But your brain is adjusting the perceived color of the gray based on what surrounds it. It is subtracting the context, compensating, editing, always editing. And here is what really gets me about this. You cannot turn it off. Knowing about simultaneous contrast does not make it go away. You can stare at those two gray patches and tell yourself they are the same, and they will still look different. Your conscious, rational mind has no access to the editing process. It happens below the level of awareness in the machinery of your visual cortex, and it delivers its result to your consciousness as a finished product. You see the finished picture. You never see the editing room. You are never seeing raw data. Never. Not once in your entire life have you seen raw data from the world. You have only ever seen your brain's editorial interpretation of the data. Now, let me make this even more interesting by leaving the human world for a moment. Try this thought experiment. Imagine explaining the color red to someone who has been blind from birth. Not someone who lost their sight. Someone who has never had a single visual experience. How would you do it? You might say, red is the color of fire, but they have never seen fire. They know fire is hot. They know it crackles, but they have no idea what it looks like. You might say red is warm and exciting. But those are feelings, not visual experiences. You are describing your emotional association with red, not red itself. You might say red is a wavelength of about 650 nanometers, and they will understand that perfectly well as a physics fact, but they will have no idea what it is like to see it, because the experience of red cannot be communicated in words or numbers or any other medium. It can only be had. It is intrinsically private, intrinsically first person, intrinsically locked inside the head that generates it. This tells you something profound. Color is not information that can be transmitted. The wavelength can be transmitted. The physics can be transmitted. But the experience, that stays behind, that lives and dies inside one nervous system. If color were a property of the physical world, you should be able to explain it by describing the physics completely. But you cannot. You can describe every photon, every cone cell, every neuron, and the blind person will understand the mechanism perfectly without having the faintest idea what red looks like. With that in mind, let us visit some other nervous systems. A mantis shrimp lives in tropical coral reefs. Vicious little creature, very colorful. And it has 16 types of photoreceptors. 16. You have 3. A mantis shrimp can detect wavelengths from deep ultraviolet all the way into the far red. Its receptors span a range of the spectrum far wider than yours, and with far more channels of information. What does a mantis shrimp see when it looks at a coral reef? We have no idea. We literally cannot imagine it. We do not have the neural hardware to construct whatever experience 16 channels of spectral information might produce. Trying to imagine what a mantis shrimp sees is like trying to imagine a color you have never seen. You cannot do it. Your brain will not let you. A dog, on the other hand, has 2 types of cones. Just 2. Its color world, whatever it looks like, is built from 2 numbers instead of 3. From the dog's perspective, humans might have some impossibly rich chromatic experience that no dog could ever conceive of. And from the mantis shrimp's perspective, humans are colorblind. But take the honeybee. that is completely invisible to you. When a bee looks at a flower, it sees patterns on the petals, landing strips, and target markers painted in ultraviolet that guide it to the nectar, an entire visual signaling system that you will never have access to. To you, the petal looks like a uniform yellow. To the bee, it is a map with arrows. So who is seeing the real color of the flower? You with your 3 cones, the bee with its ultraviolet vision, the mantis shrimp with 16 channels, the dog with 2? Nobody is seeing the real color. Because there is no real color. The flower has a reflectance spectrum. It absorbs certain wavelengths and reflects others. That is the physical fact. The reflectance spectrum is a property of the flower, but the conversion of that spectrum into an experience, into redness or yellowness or B ultraviolet patternness, happens only inside a nervous system. Different nervous systems, different experiences. No nervous system, no experience at all. Take away every brain in the universe, and what remains? Electromagnetic waves of various wavelengths, bouncing around according to Maxwell's equations. No colors, not even darkness, because darkness is also an experience. Just waves, governed by physics, completely indifferent to how anyone might perceive them. Let me turn this to one of the most familiar phenomena on Earth, the blue sky. You probably learned the explanation in school. Sunlight enters the atmosphere and hits the molecules of nitrogen and oxygen. These molecules are much smaller than the wavelength of visible light, and they scatter the incoming radiation, but they scatter shorter wavelengths more than longer ones. The scattering intensity goes as the inverse 4th power of the wavelength. So blue light, with its shorter wavelength, gets scattered much more than red light. This is Rayleigh scattering. The physics is elegant and well understood. Lord Rayleigh worked it out in the 1870s. So short wavelength light gets scattered in all directions, filling the sky with blue light from every angle. That is why when you look up at any part of the sky away from the sun, you see blue. And at sunset, when sunlight passes through a much thicker layer of atmosphere, almost all the blue is scattered away, and only the longer wavelengths, the reds and oranges, survive to reach your eyes. All of that is correct physics. But notice what is happening. The sky is not blue. The sky is scattering electromagnetic radiation preferentially by wavelength. That is the physical process. The blueness is what your brain does with the short wavelength photons once they arrive at your retina and get processed through your 3 cone types and run through your visual cortex. If a mantis shrimp looks up at the sky, it does not see your blue. It sees whatever 16-channel construction its nervous system produces. The Rayleigh scattering is the same. The wavelengths scattered are the same. But the experience is different because the experience was never in the sky. The blueness of the sky is a collaboration between atmospheric physics and your particular nervous system. Change the nervous system and the experience changes. The physics stays put. This is worth sitting with because the implications go very deep. Every visual experience you have ever had, every color, every scene, every image is a collaboration between what is out there and what is in here. You are not a passive receiver, you are an active participant. Your brain takes the thin stream of data coming through your tiny window in the electromagnetic spectrum, runs it through 3 mushy detectors, applies a mountain of contextual processing, corrects for illumination, adjusts for contrast, fills in gaps, invents colors that do not exist in the spectrum, and presents you with a finished product. A beautiful, seamless, utterly convincing finished product. So convincing that you spend your entire life believing it is reality, when it is actually a model, a spectacularly good model. But a model, there is an old question in philosophy. It has been kicking around for centuries, and nobody has ever been able to answer it. If you see red and I see red, are we seeing the same thing? I do not mean the same wavelength, I mean the same experience. Is the internal felt quality of your red the same as the internal felt quality of my red? We can both point at a fire truck and say red. We can both sort objects by color and agree on every single sorting. We can pass every behavioral test imaginable. But does that mean we are having the same inner experience? The honest answer is that we have absolutely no way to know. For all we know, what I experience when I see a long wavelength photon might be exactly what you would call blue if you could somehow experience it through my nervous system. We would never discover the difference because we both learned to call it red as children, pointing at the same objects, and all our language and behavior would match perfectly. This is not a trick question. It is not a word game. It is a genuine, deep limitation on what we can know about each other's experience. And it follows directly from the fact that color is a private construction. If color were a property of the world sitting out there on surfaces, then presumably every functional visual system would detect the same redness, and there would be nothing private about it. But since color is constructed inside each brain independently from scratch every time, there is no guarantee that the constructions match. Philosophers call these inner experiences qualia, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the sweet taste of sugar. These qualitative experiences, whatever they are, seem to be the most real things in the universe to the person having them, and yet they are completely invisible to everyone else. And this has practical consequences, by the way. Think about how two painters can look at the same hillside and paint it completely differently. One sees the shadows as purple, the other sees them as blue-gray. Both are looking at the same physical scene, the same photons are available, but their brains are running different color constancy algorithms, making different assumptions about the ambient light, and constructing different color experiences from the same raw material. Neither is wrong. Exactly. Both are constructing, and neither is seeing the hillside as it really is, because the hillside does not have colors. It has a reflectance spectrum, and that is all. This connects to what some philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. We can trace the path of a photon bouncing off the apple, through the cornea, the lens, onto the retina. We can follow the electrical signal through the optic nerve into the visual cortex. We can map the neural activity with exquisite precision. And at no point along that chain does anything that looks like redness appear. There are wavelengths, there are electrical pulses, there are patterns of firing neurons. But the felt quality, the experience of red, that is something else. Where does the neural pattern become an experience? When does electricity become sensation? We do not know. Not the physicists, not the biologists, not the philosophers. Nobody knows. And I think it is important to say that plainly, without pretending we are close to figuring it out. Now, I want to address something, because at this point some of you might be feeling a little deflated. If color is a construction, if it is not really out there in the world, does that mean it is fake? Does the beauty of a sunset dissolve when you learn the oranges and reds are neural fabrications? No, absolutely not, and I want to be very careful about this. The experience of color is real. Completely real. When you see red, that experience is happening. It is a genuine event in your brain. It is as real as any experience you will ever have. What it is not is a direct readout of what is happening in the external world. It is a constructed representation. But the construction itself is not an illusion. It is a real neurological event. Think of it like music. When a violin string vibrates at 262 cycles per second, the air molecules near the string get pushed and pulled, creating a pressure wave that travels to your ear. That is the physics. Vibrations, pressure, waves. There is nothing in the physics of air pressure that contains the experience of middle C, the warmth of it, the tone, the way it blends with other notes to create a chord. All of that, the musical experience, happens in your auditory cortex. You build it. You construct the richness of music from pressure fluctuations in the air. Does that make music less beautiful? Does knowing that middle C is not a property of the air molecule make Beethoven less moving? Of course not. The construction is the miracle. And that brings me to what I find truly astonishing about this whole business. Your brain, this 3-pound lump of biological tissue, made of exactly the same atoms as everything else, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, the same atoms you find in dirt and rocks and dead stars, takes the thinnest conceivable slice of information from the electromagnetic spectrum. 3 channels, 3 mushy, overlapping, imprecise channels, and from that impoverished signal, it constructs a visual world of staggering, almost obscene richness, millions of distinguishable colors, subtle gradations that let you tell the difference between cerulean and sky blue, between salmon and coral, between burnt sienna and raw umber. 3 numbers in, millions of colors out. That is not a limitation, that is artistry. Your brain is not a camera. A camera passively records whatever wavelengths fall on its sensor. Your brain takes those 3 numbers and paints. It creates a 3-dimensional color space, a vast internal landscape of possible experiences, and it fills that space with qualities, with warmth and coolness and vividness and depth. And it does this for a reason. Color vision did not evolve to give you an accurate picture of the electromagnetic spectrum. It evolved because it was useful for spotting ripe fruit in a canopy of green leaves. Our primate ancestors, who could distinguish the red of a ripe berry from the green of an unripe one, had a survival advantage. They ate better, they lived longer, they had more offspring. Useful for detecting the subtle flush of blood under another person's skin, which tells you whether they are angry, embarrassed, aroused, or sick. Useful for seeing a predator's tawny coat against the golden grass. Useful for navigating a world full of surfaces that needed to be identified quickly and reliably, regardless of whether the sun was high or low, whether the sky was cloudy or clear. Color is a biological tool, a spectacularly effective piece of neural engineering, not an error, not a deficiency, a solution to the problem of navigating a complicated electromagnetic environment with limited senses and a pressing need to not get eaten. But it is not the world, it is a map of the world, and the map is not the territory. There is a deep lesson here about the nature of perception in general, not just color. Your entire sensory world, everything you experience, is a model. Sound is not out there in the world. Out there are pressure waves in the air. Your cochlea detects those waves, your auditory cortex processes them, and the experience of sound, pitch, timbre, melody, all of it is constructed. Temperature is not out there in the world. Out there are molecules with varying kinetic energies. Your thermoreceptors detect those energies, and your brain constructs the feeling of warmth or cold. Taste is not in the food. The food has chemical molecules. Your tongue has receptors, and the experience of sweetness or bitterness is a construction. Every sense works this way. Every single one. You live inside a model that your brain builds for you in real time, and you mistake that model for reality because it is the only reality you have ever known. Color is just the most vivid, most dramatic, most obviously constructed example. There is a man, roughly 8% of men actually, who has a certain genetic variation that affects his cone cells. Maybe his L cones and his M cones are too similar in their wavelength sensitivity, and so he has trouble distinguishing red from green. He looks at a tree full of ripe cherries and sees the same color everywhere. Fruit and leaf, indistinguishable. This is color blindness, and it tells you something important. If color were a property of the cherry, it would not matter what was going on in this man's eye. The cherry would be red for him the same as for anyone else. But it is not, because the color was never in the cherry. It was in the interaction between the cherry's reflectance spectrum and his particular set of cone cells. Change the cones, and the color changes. The cherry stays exactly the same. A colorblind man and a normal-sighted woman look at the same traffic light. Both of them receive photons from the same source. The physics reaching their eyes is identical down to the last wavelength. But one sees a clear distinction between red and green, and the other struggles. Same light, different experience. That is only possible if the experience is being generated inside each observer, not transmitted from the light. And it gets stranger. There are women, a small number, who may carry 4 types of cone cells instead of 3. Tetrachromates. Their 4th cone sits between the L and M cone peaks, in a part of the spectrum where most of us have a gap in our resolution. These women may be able to distinguish colors that look identical to the rest of us. 2 swatches of orange paint that you and I swear are the same color, a tetrachromate might see as clearly different. Same paint, same physics, same photons, but 4 numbers instead of 3, and a richer color world opens up. If color were a property of the paint, it would not matter how many cone types you had. The paint would be one color, period. But the paint is not one color. The paint is a reflectance spectrum. And how you experience that spectrum depends entirely on the hardware you bring to the encounter. And if you think about it, everybody is colorblind relative to the mantis shrimp. We are all missing information. We are all seeing a reduced, simplified, constructed version of the electromagnetic world. We just do not notice because everybody around us has the same 3 cone types and sees roughly the same construction. We mistake consensus for reality. Most primates actually are dichromats. 2 cone types, like dogs, or trichromatic color vision, or 3 cones, is relatively recent in evolutionary terms. It emerged perhaps 30 to 40 million years ago in the ancestor of old world monkeys, apes, and humans. A genetic mutation duplicated one of the 2 existing cone genes and shifted its sensitivity peak slightly, and suddenly what was a two-channel system became a three-channel system. Why did that mutation survive? Because it was useful, spectacularly useful. A primate with 3 cone types can spot ripe red fruit against a background of green leaves far more easily than a primate with 2. In a tropical forest canopy, where finding food efficiently can mean the difference between living and dying, that advantage was decisive. We see the red and green distinction because our ancestors who could see it ate more and survived longer. That is the blunt, practical reason you experience color the way you do, not because the world is colored, because color-seeing ancestors had more babies. You know what fascinates me most about all of this? We are part of the universe. Every atom in your body was forged inside a star. The carbon in your retina, the nitrogen in your visual cortex, the iron in the blood that feeds your brain, all of it was cooked up in some stellar furnace billions of years ago, flung out into space when the star exploded, drifted through the void, got swept up into a new cloud of gas, collapsed into the solar system, ended up on this planet, and eventually arranged itself into you. And you, this arrangement of star stuff, have the ability to take electromagnetic radiation, the very same kind of radiation that stars produce, and turn it into the experience of color, into the redness of a sunset, into the deep blue of the ocean at twilight, into the tender green of new leaves in spring. The universe, through you, experiences itself. Not as it is, exactly. The universe as it is has no color, no sound, no warmth, no beauty. It has wavelengths and frequencies and fields and particles. But through the improbable, magnificent accident of nervous systems evolving on at least one small planet, the universe gets to be experienced as something, as color, as music, as the feeling of sunlight on your skin. And think about what had to happen for that to occur. First, stars had to form and burn for billions of years. Then those stars had to explode and scatter heavy elements through the galaxy. Then those elements had to coalesce into a rocky planet in the right orbit around a stable star. Then chemistry had to become biology. Single cells had to figure out how to detect light. Simple photoreceptors had to evolve over hundreds of millions of years into complex eyes with multiple cone types. Brains had to grow larger and more sophisticated until they could take 3 numbers from a retina and construct the experience of a sunset. The chain of events that leads from a hydrogen atom in a primordial gas cloud to the feeling of seeing red is so long, so intricate, so dependent on 1,000 accidents that it almost defies belief. And yet here you are, seeing color, every day, without even thinking about it. Every link in that chain had to hold. The atoms in your eye are no different from the atoms in a rock. But the arrangement matters, the organization matters. Somehow, through a process we do not yet understand, and we should be honest about that, we really do not understand it. That arrangement gives rise to experience, to seeing, to the whole wild, vivid, color-drenched world you wake up to every morning. So when I tell you that color does not exist out there in the world, I am not diminishing anything. I am showing you something extraordinary. The universe, made of colorless particles and colorless waves and colorless fields, has managed through the patient work of evolution over billions of years to produce a structure that can experience color, that can take 3 numbers and create a sunset. That is not a lesser reality. That is the most remarkable thing I know. Everything you see, every shade, every hue, every subtle variation, is a gift from your nervous system to you. It is something your brain made in real time on the spot from almost nothing. And the fact that what it makes is so beautiful, so rich, so capable of stopping you in your tracks or moving you to tears, that tells you something extraordinary about what a brain can do with 3 numbers and a few 100 million years of practice. 3 numbers in, a world of color out, not bad for a lump of atoms that did not even exist 8 billion years ago. Think about the color that moves you most, the one you keep coming back to, and ask yourself honestly, is that feeling in the light or is it in you?